Hello and welcome, I'm your Kudmaki. So here we have the 2025 Unity Gaming Report. This is a massive report that Unity does every single year. It really has a massive amount of content, this is really huge. And for the most part, this is talking about the 5 big trends that are shaping game development in 2025. These reports are only super interesting, full of very curious data. I made a video on the 5 trends for last year for 2024. So if you want to see the trends for that report, then check out that video. And here let's check out the ones for 2025 to see what is going on this year. By the way, I will be joining Unity's official livestream tomorrow with a few more people to discuss this report. It's a panel with myself and some other developers. It should be a fun, interesting conversation, so check it out on Unity's YouTube channel tomorrow. So over here on the report, it starts off by actually acknowledging that things have been pretty rough for the past few years. So over here, the last few years have been a difficult time in game development. The industry is still massive with over 3 billion global active players. That's an insane amount. And video games crossed over $184 billion in 2024, easily out-earning TVs and movies. Yet, there's a grimmer set of numbers too, the tallies of layoffs, studio closures, and canceled projects that index deep challenges facing the industry. So yep, the past few years have definitely been very challenging. Lots of layoffs, lots of studios going off. Funding is really hard to get. So it's good that they start off by acknowledging this very, very important issue. A lot about this report is going to be about efficiency. So for studios, success lies on the razor's edge. Basically be bold enough to capture players' hearts and minds while staying safe enough to reduce your risk. So harness innovative tech to save time, but don't waste effort exploring new tools and workflows you will not use. This is definitely going to be a big important point. How to manage risk, be more efficient, and so on. I think that is going to be the main challenge for almost any studio here in 2025. And the question that this entire report tries to answer is right this. How are game developers planning for success this year? What are the options studios are weighing? And how can your team benefit from insight into that? So this report draws on numerous polls and surveys conducted by third-party agencies and by the Unity team at major industry events such as GDC and Gamescom in 24, alongside unique data from nearly 5 million Unity Engine developers, which incidentally, that's a very interesting stat. Apparently there are 5 million Unity Engine developers. Looking here on the footnote, apparently that's from internal editor analytics, and it means the number of users of the editor with a compliance key in 12 months ending on that date. So that seems pretty impressive. That's a very large amount. So apparently there are 5 million people that have used Unity in the past 12 months. That seems like a pretty nice number. Interesting. So over here, let's see the 5 trends shaping up game development this year. So trend number 1 is devs are managing risk by reducing costs. So yep, definitely very important thing. Basically, studios are facing uncertainty by doing more with less. So that can mean stretching resources with innovative tech, refusing to take on debt for less exposure, investing in live ops, or keeping the team lean. So the good news is there are multiple approaches you have for basically managing risk, reducing costs. So there are various avenues to try to solve possibly the biggest challenge of this year. Then trend number 2 is how studios are experimenting with different multiplayer setups. That is definitely interesting. I mean, multiplayer is always a big thing, but experimenting with different setups, that is quite interesting. So basically devs are still very interested in building networked multiplayer experiences, and 64% report working on networked multiplayer or couch co-op, which that alone sounds like a very interesting stat. It seems like couch co-op, which was something that was pretty much dying for the past few years, seems like it should be having a little bit of a resurgence. I think that's a great thing, so that's nice. And this year, many studios also report exploring new media, formats, and features in their multiplayer games. So I'm curious to read this thing in detail in order to see what exactly are those different media, formats, features, and so on. Then for trend number 3, devs are sticking with trusted platforms. So for a long time, one really great strategy to basically making a living as a studio or as a solo dev has been multi-platform. That's one of the biggest strengths of Unity, is how you can make your game just once and then very easily port it to mobile, PC, Steam, console, pretty much anything you want. That is one of the biggest benefits of Unity. And yeah, like it says here, taking games to as many platforms as possible is still a popular strategy to extend a title's reach, audience, and ROI, but studios are cautious about bringing their games to new venues. Specifically, over here the report talks about web and social media and how those games are just starting to gain traction. And in platforms, it also says how 90% of devs launched their most recent games on mobile, with desktop not far behind at 80%. So in a little bit, we're going to see what exactly is the data makeup, exactly what kind of developers they ask their stats about. Then for trend number 4, here we have games are getting bigger. And that is actually bigger in multiple ways, not just literally gigabytes. So basically here, the video game market is competitive in building big games, whether they're augmented by expensive worlds, lots of levels, or non-stop updates. So those are all various ways that you can basically make your game be much bigger. And you have to make sure that those offer a clear-cut way to communicate the game's value to the players. And apparently it's working, with apparently 88% devs say that overall playtime is on the rise. I think one of the biggest concerns nowadays is kind of like the winner-takes-all sort of thing. I believe a big reason why the industry has gone through some challenges in the past few years is related to things like, for example, Fortnite, which is just a single game, but that single game takes up so many of people's playtimes. So many people nowadays just play one game and that's it. And of course, if time is limited, if everyone has the same 24 hours, if people spend more time playing a single game, that's less time playing other games. So I'm actually surprised to see that apparently 88% of devs say that overall playtimes are on the rise. So I'm definitely curious to see this report to see a bit more on that stat. And then for the trend number 5, devs are looking to tech to keep projects on track. So yep, again, back to the same theme of efficiency. Always trying to look for the best tools to make you as efficient as possible so you can make games in less time, which leads to fewer costs. And now here for the slightly controversial thing, which is interesting. 96% of studios we talk to are integrating AI tools into their workflows. But machine learning hasn't unleashed the full-scale revolution that so many in the industry thought was coming. Instead, devs are making calculated choices to find tech solutions to more mundane problems, with less than half of devs using AI tools in any one workflow. So yeah, I'm definitely very curious to read this part in more detail, because yeah, so apparently 96% are using or considering using AI tools, but only half of them are actually using AI tools in any one workflow. Now I know that AI is a very touchy subject, there's a lot of very strong opinions on both sides. So yeah, I'm curious to see this whole thing, to see what exactly are these stats, what exactly are these studios using AI for. And then down here we can see about the data. So some of the data in this report is drawn from the Unity engine and portfolio service products, including games made with Unity that are sending events through the platform, so things like Unity Analytics and so on. These solutions span mobile, PC, XR, web, social, and console gaming, so they really do capture pretty much the entirety of the games industry. And additional data for this report comes from a survey of 300 game developers, so that's a nice chunk of size. As far as I know in terms of statistics, once you get to a few hundred, technically you do have enough data that you can basically extrapolate. Apparently that gives it a 95% confidence level, so that's nice. Additionally, we include data from 2 in-person surveys conducted at industry events. So Unity employees conducted interviews with 144 randomly selected studios on GDC in San Francisco, and with 231 at Gamescom in Germany. So yeah, so basically this entire report, all the data in here, all this information basically seems to contain data from pretty much across the industry as a whole. So it is not just specifically people who went to GDC or Gamescom. It also includes an online survey. It also includes just stats from the engine. And a lot of these are either small studios or big studios. So it really does capture the whole thing, which on the one hand is great. So we can see a very high level overview of the entire industry. But on the other hand, again, keep in mind not to apply this way too much to yourself. For example, if you are a solo indie dev making Steam PC games, kind of like me, if so, then definitely do take some of these with a grain of salt. Not that it's a negative, just because this includes the entirety of the industry, so keep that in mind as you're looking through all these stats. And yep, so let's look at the first big trend. Devs are managing risk by reducing costs. Studios are staying small, but going big. Media stories about layoffs, cuts, and studio closures have become all too familiar, and several hotly anticipated flops have shown that there's no such thing as too big to fail. The obvious example to this is something like Concord, where Sony spent apparently something like $500 million building that entire game, building a live service game, and then it comes out and makes literally pretty much $0. So yeah, in this industry, there's definitely no such thing as too big to fail. So whether you're a small indie dev, on a small team, on a big team, or on a AAA team, regardless of what games you're making, yeah, it does seem like managing risks and reducing costs is very, very important. Specifically, some practical advice for indie devs, kind of like myself. My advice has always been make small games. I really do believe that you should be making more small games, things like 6 months project. I really believe you should be doing that as opposed to like 2 to 3 year projects. I think those are very, very risky, very, very tricky. And perhaps on the bright side is how nowadays on the industry, you don't actually need like a massive studio or a massive game in order to find some massive success. As an example, from last year, you've got games like Balatro made $28 million. That was a solo dev game. You've got Supermarket Simulator, 27 million, Chained Together, TCG Card Shop Simulator, which I think was also a solo dev game. So on the bright side, you've got more solo or very tiny teams finding massive success. So it shows you that you don't need a massive team, you don't need a ton of resources to make something that a lot of players are really going to love. And again, in these, I believe the Supermarket Simulator, I believe the original prototype was built in something like 4 months. So definitely don't think how in 6 months you can only build something like a Flappy Bird clone. You can definitely build some very interesting games in that time frame. And in terms of managing risks and reducing costs, that is really my best advice. And by the way, if you want to save time and make awesome games, make them faster, if so, then check out my recently released the CodeMonkey Toolkit. This is a collection of 40 tools and elements. They are super useful in pretty much any kind of genre. They help you basically get started much quickly or just help you polish all kinds of games. So yep, if you're interested, check it out in the link in the description. Back here on the report. So the way that respondents say that they mitigate risk, it seems that the main thing is over here using efficiency tools, which again makes sense. Tooling is very, very important. The right tool can make you work pretty much 5 times faster. And again, if you work 5 times faster, that means your game costs 5 times less to make. So efficiency is definitely very, very important. Then apparently monetization and live ops. So I believe this has to do with basically getting more out of each game that you put out. This is more of a thing in terms of mobile. Then you've got publisher support, you've got avoid overhiring, refuse that, and just stay small. Then devs are also expanding games' endurance and reach. That's an interesting question. Over here we have several very interesting options. It appears that the main one is to maximize the existing game, so basically expanding upon it with DLC, live ops, and so on. But then it's new ideas in a different genre. That's actually extremely interesting. Personally, I would usually recommend the third option, new ideas in the same genre, just because usually you gain quite a lot of knowledge as soon as you make some kind of game. So then if you make another game, and if you make it on the same genre, chances are you are going to basically reuse a ton of that knowledge, so you don't have to relearn the genre's basics all over again. That is why, for example, for my own games, quite a lot of my games are pretty much management tycoon games. So Think Guardians, that's kind of management, and Battle Royale Tycoon, Ninja Tycoon, I've got Blueprint Tycoon, Game Corp. So the reason is, first of all, because I enjoy that genre, so I enjoy making it. And secondly, every single one of those games that I make in that same genre, I can reuse a bunch of things and I can be quite a bit more efficient. And at the same time, I know more about the genre, so I can be more confident that the game that I'm going to build is going to be quite a bit better. But again, here apparently most people would go for new ideas in a different genre, so that's interesting. I wonder if that means sort of spin-offs, so kind of reusing the same IP but doing it in a different way. So one example of that would be, for example, the SteamWorld games. So you've got SteamWorld Dig, that's kind of a Metroidvania digging game. Then you've got SteamWorld Heist, which is kind of like turn-based strategy. Then you've got SteamWorld Build, which is kind of like a city builder. So these devs have found quite a lot of success using that strategy, basically using the exact same IP, the exact same SteamWorld IP, but placing it in different genres, different things. And it seems that in this case, it has worked quite well. And there's a great quote here from the developer behind Dredge, really awesome game. So it's a balance between what the creative team has left to give and what our players want. Expanding an IP often makes financial sense and is great for fans who want more of what they already love. However, creating something new can re-inspire the team, open up opportunities for even bigger success, and bring fresh ideas back to the original IP. Ultimately, the decision comes down to whether we're delivering something meaningful to both our players and ourselves. Which, yeah, of course, if you want to make a game, you personally really have to be into the game, and you have to have some kind of idea that you think players would indeed love. So when deciding what games to make, what genres to explore, always keep in mind these two things. You have to love it, and your players have to love it. Then devs want better tools and learning resources for growth. This is actually an interesting one for me personally. I wonder what they mean by learning resources. That can mean so many things. It can mean tutorials, courses, it can mean videos, maybe text tutorials. It can mean learning about the technical aspects, or perhaps all about game design, or perhaps about organization, working as a team, and so on. So I'd be curious to see more detail on specifically what learning resources studios are looking for. But over here, in terms of what they want, mainly it's end-to-end stacks, which I guess makes sense how Unity has so many tools. You can definitely use Unity for pretty much everything. So for the original prototype, for actual production, for post-production, for doing live ops, monetization, and so on. Unity has tools for pretty much all of those things. Yeah, 51, better tools in learning. So yeah, interesting. And of course, a lot of people want a broader player base. And it's actually great news because, for example, Steam continues growing. They just published the Steam review of the year 2024, and it was another record-breaking year where they recently hit 40 million CCUs. So despite the fact that it seems like the industry is slightly stagnating, it seems like this one is still happening, even if a bit slowly. Then another very important takeaway is how games are doing well in Latin America. So here, where respondents say they're seeing the most success by region, and over here we can see and how 55% says from Latin America, then from Southeast Asia, from Central and Southern Asia, and Africa and Middle East. So this is definitely a very important point, something that I've mentioned several times, and if you've done some research on, for example, Steam game marketing, you've certainly heard about it. It's how the games industry, and Steam specifically, is very, very global. So one great tip that I can give you to find more success with your games is definitely make sure to localize your games. And like I said, just recently, Steam did their 2024 year in review, and in there, they mentioned how Steam is indeed global, with lots of players and developers coming from all over the world, not just the English-speaking world. If we look in the Steam hardware survey, we can see down here under language, yep, we can see how English is just 23% of the massive Steam audience. So if your game is English only, just look how you're actually losing out on almost 80% of Steam. So yep, localization is very, very important. I highly encourage you to do it. Unity actually has an excellent localization package. It makes it super easy to use. I have a lecture on it in my Ultimate Unity Overview course if you want to learn how to use it. Then here's a very interesting comment. So I think that free-to-play gamers who are already hardcore on UGC platforms and emerging markets like China and India are primed to grow into a major audience for more traditional gaming experiences like those on Steam and AAA. This is a very interesting take. I do wonder if this is accurate. I hope so, because that would be nice. Basically, nowadays, platforms like, for example, Roblox are massive. There's an insane amount of people that go on Roblox every single day. And those people are using UGC, meaning user-generated content, meaning things like custom levels that other players have made. So I wonder if this is indeed becoming kind of a trend. So those players that start off, let's say when they are 10, 13 years old, they start off playing something like Roblox, and they're playing those custom levels. I wonder if those people then do become hardcore consumers of standard AAA games, something like that. Because another stat that has been happening in the industry for the past few years is how it seems like the level of hardcore gamers, so people who buy consoles and AAA games, it seems like the level of those has kind of leveled off. So I do wonder if this will happen, if more hardcore UGC players, if those will turn into Steam AAA players. That's definitely very interesting. I'm definitely curious to see if that will happen. Like I said, Roblox has a massive audience, and usually that audience is very young. So what will happen as those kids grow up? Will they stay just on Roblox? Will Roblox eventually become something where it supports more AAA shooting mature games, that kind of thing? Or will those players basically migrate away from Roblox in something like Steam, consoles, and so on? That's definitely going to be very curious to see what happens with that. Alright, so trend number 2. Studios are experimenting with different multiplayer experiences. So yep, I'm curious to see what are these different multiplayer experiences. Basically, devs are offering gamers more ways to play together. The 2024 Unity Gaming Report, so the one from last year, highlighted just how much players want social gaming experiences. The data showed that on average, mobile games with multiplayer features had over 40% more monthly active users than those without. This year, we dug into how studios are meeting that demand, including looking at what kinds of experiences they want to offer gamers. So yep, multiplayer is always a big thing. Multiplayer is always one of those high risk, high reward sort of things. If you find success, you will pretty much become Fortnite and make billions of dollars. But if you don't, you have what is called the cold start problem. If not enough people play your game, then people are going to see, okay, this multiplayer game doesn't have many players, it's kind of a dead game, so because of that, fewer people are going to play it. If fewer people are playing it, then even fewer people are going to play it, and that becomes an issue. So yeah, multiplayer, very much high risk, high reward. When it works, you get millions of players, a lot of success, but if it doesn't work, then things can be very tricky. In terms of the industry, multiplayer games still dominate. So over here, how respondents describe their most recent games, and you can see, yep, 58% multiplayer games. Again, keep in mind what is the data source for this kind of stats. Keep in mind how these are not necessarily, for example, solo indie devs making games on Steam and so on. This involves pretty much people from the entire industry, mobile, PC, Steam, small teams, big teams, and so on. Because over here we see multiplayer with 58%, then we see single player with networked features at 32%, couch co-op at 6%, and then only 4% single player non-networked. Personally, if I look at Steam's new releases, most of them are single player. Most of them have no connection whatsoever. So that is why I give that caveat about what exactly is the data source for this. But still very interesting. That's a vast majority making either multiplayer games or games with some networked features. And another great comment over here, which is look at your players as a community rather than just numbers on a dashboard. They're your greatest asset for feedback, marketing, and long-term success. So listen to them, engage with them, support their aspirations, and let them be part of your journey. That is definitely very important. If you make a multiplayer game and if you hope that game to find success, you absolutely need some kind of community manager, someone to actually manage that community. If you want to keep the game alive for the long term, some game that is mostly multiplayer, if so, then you do need that connection between the developer and the player. You need to get some feedback in order to see what exactly do the players want, so you can push out future updates, so you can keep those players engaged, keep them enjoying your game, keep them playing. But again, like it says here, it has to be a genuine connection. So if you're the kind of person who doesn't really like talking to users, then I would not recommend you go into making a primarily multiplayer game. And then some interesting stats, which is how teams of all sizes are building multiplayer games. So over here, by team size, we can see teams of 1 to 2 people, and we've got 19% making couch co-op, 44% making online multiplayer, and 37% only making single player. So again, that is actually very impressive, which is how such a small team, 1 to 2 people, and out of those, it seems that 63% are actually making multiplayer games. Then 3 to 5, for some reason, the single player increased by a little bit. And interestingly enough, which is basically as the team size increases, it seems that it becomes more and more single player. Not too much, but definitely a slight uptrend over there, and a slight downtrend on couch co-op. Now this is pretty surprising to see just how many small studios, 1 to 2 people, are actually doing multiplayer. Which honestly, I think is great news, because I think that is a testament to just how good the tools have gotten. In my case, I just recently made 2 free multiplayer courses. So one on making a game using netcode for EM objects, another one on making a game using netcode for entities. And yep, I can confirm that those tool sets are very easy to use, especially when compared to many years ago. I mean, 10 years ago when I tried to make my own multiplayer game, I literally had to parse bytes back and forth manually, whereas nowadays the tools are much easier. And if that is definitely evidence right here, which is how so many studios with just 1 to 2 people are actually doing multiplayer, which back in the day, like 20, 30 years ago, you would definitely need a team of like 10 people to be able to manage such a complex genre. And then an interesting comment from the dev behind Ship of Fools, which is how the COVID pandemic highlighted the importance of both couch co-op and online co-op games, as they became one of the few ways that people could connect and spend time together. Now, more than ever, there's a longing for games that bring back that sense of shared fun and camaraderie. So yep, the data definitely shows a nice uptrend on the name of couch co-op games, which used to be very rare for the past few years, but apparently there's been a nice interesting resurgence. And for example, Ship of Fools, a very, very successful game that definitely has couch co-op cooperative. The fact this game was so successful is definitely proof that there is an appetite for that. People want to play games with their friends, either online or really just couch co-op. And in terms of genres, multiplayer features are being integrated across genres. So over here, for all the genres used in the various multiplayer games, number one, of course, is shooter, battle royale, or battle arena games. Then you've got adventure, which is kind of a meaningless genre. It doesn't necessarily mean like point and click games. I would guess it means like action adventure, that kind of thing. Then you've got card games, you've got simulation games, some fighting strategy, and at the bottom is actually sports. I guess that's just because there are very few sports games. But yep, if you want to make multiplayer games, in this chart is kind of interesting to see basically the supply and demand for it. And for some more surprising data is over here a chart on how devs are exploring different networking setups. And we can see over here, yep, couch co-op, 28%, that's nice. Obviously, 99% has online multiplayer. But then surprising, at least to me, is over here we've got 69% on asymmetrical multiplayer and 72% on asynchronous multiplayer. This is quite interesting, I think. I feel this is perhaps more in the mobile space, but still very, very interesting. I do think there are quite a lot of interesting game genres, game ideas you can make with these kinds of multiplayer. So making it asymmetrical or making it asynchronous. So this is definitely surprising to me, but in a very good way. And you can see here how asymmetrical gaming experiences are on the rise. 69% of devs say they're exploring this setup. That is interesting. I'm curious to see what those games will come out of it. On to trend number 3, which is how devs are sticking with trusted platforms. So studios still launch multi-platform games, but they're prioritizing tried and tested forms. So yep, in general, going multi-platform is a great thing. Basically having your same game being playable on multiple different places. It allows you to reach different players, multiple players, more players. So in general, if you can do it, that's a good thing. And like I was saying, platforms are really one of the big benefits of Unity. You can make the same game just once and they're very easily ported to all kinds of things. And over here, this report in a little bit is going to talk about the very interesting web and how some developers are planning to launch on it. So that's a very interesting platform that is apparently up and coming. But we can see mobile and desktop are still on top. So over here, what platforms dev respondents targeted at their most recent launch. And we can see split by team size. So for 1 to 9 people, actually quite a lot of it is mobile. Again, going back to what I was saying, what is the audience that responded to this survey? Then we actually see quite a decent amount making web browser games and social games. Then not many doing consoles over here on 1 to 9 people, and quite a few making desktop games, and also VR over here with a little bit. Then basically as the team size increases, mobile pretty much always stays pretty close to the top. But over here we can see, for example, consoles. Consoles are very tiny over here on the 1 to 9 people, and as they increase, yep, these become pretty much always consoles. So for 300 people studios, these are definitely massive studios, and yep, these are definitely all in on console and desktop. So that's likely because going on console still has a few barriers to entry. Basically, you need to get signed up as an actual developer, you need to get some kind of dev kits, you need to try doing that. It requires perhaps some kind of pre-existing relationship with the platform holder. So getting on consoles is a little bit more tricky. Me personally, I've never had one of my games on console. It's still something that I would love to do someday, and technically it can be done. There are many small devs making their games on console, but here we can see how there's definitely some kind of benefit to having in larger studios, and those larger studios do tend to go more for consoles. Although, interestingly enough, we can see over here, large studios are actually also going for VR games. So that is definitely very interesting. I definitely would have expected VR games to be more over here on the 1 to 9, 10 to 40. But apparently it seems that the biggest one is on the 300 people. So I do wonder if we're going to see quite a lot of VR games coming out in the future. And the comment over here from developer behind 1000X Resist. It's for indies, it is really no surprise that Steam is our biggest platform. That was an obvious first launch platform. There really is no other choice in our minds. And yep, for indie devs, I would definitely agree with that sentiment. I think post-launch, seeing that a healthy long tail is possible on Steam is even more encouraging. Which yep, Steam really is a massive platform. I mean, you've got example of games like Terraria, which has come out in 2011, so that was 14 years ago, and yet we can see it is still constantly getting tons and tons of players all the time. So yep, definitely do not underestimate the long tail. If you make a great game, chances are players are going to keep wanting to play your game for many years before. And in terms of revenues, we can see, so for mobile, we can see that mostly 1 to 9 people are making most of their revenue from mobile. and very little from the 300 plus studios. But then down here for the console, over here we've got the whole thing flipped. So very few 1 to 9 people studios, very few of those are actually making most of their money from consoles. But on the big studios, most of them are coming from consoles. And then here the interesting one, which is how web games are still gaining traction. So the percentage of respondents considering developing or porting for the web. And over here we can see how most of them, 89% not considering, but 11%, which again, keep in mind how this actually involves quite a lot of developers, so 11% is actually a pretty decent amount. Unity, for the past few years, has been investing quite hard on game development for the web. I think it was last year that they announced mobile web browser support, which apparently is super important. That got quite a lot of claps. I'm not familiar with that world, but that seems to be very important. Then Unity also has their Unity Play, or something called Struct, which is how you can basically make games and make them playable on the web, no installs, no problems like that. And these actually have some very proper, very well-made games. The only issue with web is what they say here, so devs who avoid web worry about the technical gaps and revenue streams. So basically, respondents say why they're not choosing to target web development. And yep, the main thing is right here, it's outdated or underpowered technology, which Unity is actively trying to solve. Then inconsistent browser support, that is always the issue whenever you do anything to the web. Making it work with every single browser and every single use case is such a nightmare. Then lack of support for mobile browsers, which again, Unity is actively trying to work on that. And then monetization, yep, that is probably going to be an issue. Lack of marketplace, I think Unity is trying to solve that with play.unity.com. So based on all this, it seems that Unity is betting that web will become the next big platform in the future. Or not necessarily the next big one, but become a big platform. They're definitely investing heavily in trying to solve all of these gaps that make people not push to the web. So I'm very curious to see what will happen. I mean, for me personally, I grew up, I started making games using Flash, and back then it was really awesome. You just go on something like Newgrounds or Congregate, and you've got thousands of games you can play, just one click, no install, no nothing, just click and play. I think it's really such a shame that Flash essentially died. It was a really awesome way for new developers to basically get started making games. You can make a really tiny game, put it up on a website, and have quite a lot of people, like 1,000, 2,000 people play your game, giving you feedback so you can improve. That has helped me quite a lot, and I was really sad to see basically Flash die, and new developers nowadays kind of lose that. So in a way, I'm kind of hoping that this really does happen, that web sees some kind of a resurgence. So maybe in the future we will have similar Flash portals like we used to have, except now instead of being Flash, it will simply be using Unity. I think that would be a nice feature. Number 4, games are getting bigger. So yeah, that's an interesting one. Devs are betting on bigger worlds, longer lasting IPs, and more content. And right away, build sizes are rising. So the median Unity build size in megabytes from 22 to 24, and basically, yep, increasing from 100 to 167. Again, keep in mind the context for this data. So this is likely including quite a lot of mobile games. And yep, in mobile world, 100 megs is actually quite a lot of data. But in the Steam, desktop, PC, console world, in there, of course, there are lots of people complaining how every single Call of Duty is like 200 gigabytes. That's an insane amount. So this trend is definitely something that happens both on mobile, PC, console, pretty much everywhere. And specifically, what kind of games? So here, open world games are popular across devices. So yep, we can see open world games, very, very big on desktop and closed platforms, which I'm guessing means consoles. Sandbox games, also pretty big, and larger levels, also pretty big. As we go down in platform, obviously those go down because platforms actually have quite a lot more limitations. And for a really interesting stat is how studios are focused on game size. So over here, the respondents identify their most important gameplay elements. And we can see how the biggest slice of the pie is smooth, high-performance play. That's awesome, that is really good, I really like to see that. And then we see at number 2, here we have number of missions or levels in the game. Then we have the game performance metrics. Then it's game modes, it's multiplayer modes, music tracks, and so on. So yep, quite a lot of focus. But I do like how most of it is on smooth, high-performance play. For me personally, as a player, that is definitely the thing that I value most about. I will always pick a game that lets me play at 144 FPS versus something that I'm forced to play at like 30 FPS. So it's good to see that developers are focused on this, focused on making sure that their games actually run well, despite trying to target bigger and bigger games. And then as studios try many strategies to keep players interested, but more content is king. So basically, what techniques are they using for player engagement? And of course, the only rewards are missions. If you have a live service game, that is kind of a must-have. Then achievements and challenges. This is always a great thing to add, even on single-player games. Then if you got user-generated content modding, I'm actually surprised to see this a little bit low. When UGC works, it can be a massive benefit. So if you can, I would definitely recommend you look into adding some potential for UGC in your game. There are quite a lot of games that have a massive long tail, specifically because of the workshop, specifically because of mods. And of course, PvP for keeping players engaged, that's always an obvious one. And over here, updating the core game content, so basically adding more and more content. So yep, lots of various interesting strategies to basically keep your players engaged. However, on this topic, on the topic of game size, build size, and so on, On this topic, I would definitely caution you to not necessarily try to follow this too much. Assuming you are, for example, an indie dev kind of like me, as an indie dev, you really should not be trying to compete with having a massive world, having massive amounts of content. Chances are you won't be able to build enough. So as an indie dev, my advice would be stick to making some very interesting, unique experiences. You don't have to compete with games like GTA, and you shouldn't try to compete with that. If you are an indie dev, then making a game on the scale of GTA would be pretty much impossible. And players don't necessarily need that either. So as an example, here is the game A Short Hike. It's overwhelmingly positive, people love this game, people absolutely love it, and this is a game that has only about 2 hours of gameplay. So that's why my advice for in-devs would be don't try to compete on just sheer game size, instead try to make your games interesting and unique. And now for the really interesting part, so devs are looking to tech to keep projects on track. Again, going back to the entire efficiency theme, devs are trying to find tools to keep projects on time and within budget, and how that is essential. Here's an interesting comment from developer behind Harold Halibut. Definitely a very interesting game, a very unique game. The whole thing was made hand sculpted or from clay or something like that. Definitely a very, very tricky game to build, took many, many years. And over here he says, building all the game assets by hand isn't exactly the most efficient way, but we do try to automate a lot of the processes in our analog to digital pipeline, so more time can be spent on analog creation. So this is definitely a game that has some very unique challenges, but in general, this takeaway of trying to automate the process as much as possible, that is something you should always try to do. Again, remember, efficiency is definitely key. Then for what exactly are the top challenges when developing a game? And over here we can see how the biggest one is long R&D times trialing new tech. It's definitely an interesting one to see this one at the very top. Personally, I would not necessarily recommend you do some R&D on some brand new tech when you're trying to make a game, but I guess this would also include time spent on making some kind of prototype. And yep, that would be my advice if you want to learn how to make some kind of new thing. For example, if you want to learn about Unity Dots, which is a fascinating technology, but definitely has quite a bit of a learning curve, I definitely recommend you spend some time first learning it before actually deciding to implement it in some kind of game. Then apparently another big challenge is keeping projects organized, in scope, and on time. Then it's managing tools and systems, and then it's finding a unique idea. I would say this is definitely one of the big ones. I mean, game ideas are a dime a dozen, everyone has a dozen game ideas, but finding a good idea, meaning an idea that is doable and marketable and works well in today's market, that actually becomes quite a bit trickier. One series of videos that I've recommended many times on this topic is over here. These videos from the Clark Tank on how to make video game hooks. These talk about how to find a good game idea and what exactly makes a good game idea. So if you want to learn about this topic, which I think is a very, very important topic, I highly recommend you go watch these videos. And then for the potential controversial part, so here devs are positive about AI tools. So here's the respondent sentiment about AI's impact on the gaming industry. And for the most part, it seems somewhat positive, then it's extremely positive, and then it's neutral, and only a tiny bit is actually negative. Now these are definitely some very, very interesting results. I mean, honestly, right now there's so much noise about AI, it's really hard to get a grasp on what exactly people think about it. If you go in some place, seems everybody hates AI, go to another place, seems like AI is the future, is the only way. So it's really hard to try to find some nuance within this entire topic. But it seems over here in their survey, it seems that 79% feel positive about AI in game dev. So yep, this is definitely a very interesting, slightly surprising stat. I wonder if people in the comments on this video are going to be 79% as positive. But in general, according to this survey, it seems most devs are positive about AI in game dev. And actually in terms of players themselves, it seems that players don't really care. So here is Supermarket Simulator, one of the biggest hits of last year. And yep, it does have a AI generated capsule. And again, still very positive, people still love this game. It even has the AI disclosure down here. So it's telling it that they use AI to create the capsules for the game store page. When Steam implemented this little AI disclosure, I was very curious to see what is going to happen. Are players going to hate games that have this kind of disclosure? And it seems like they don't generally care. Again, this game, massive mega hit, very positive. Another one, so Fast Food Simulator, also very, very positive. And down here we can also see, this game does not contain AI generated content, but it is used just for the Steam images. Another example, here is the Great Rebellion. So again, lots of reviews, very positive, nearly universally positive. And down here we can see, some backgrounds and a few levels are based on images created by AI, as well as a few props in the levels. So yep, like I said, this topic definitely very interesting to see these stats, 79%. And yet, if you go in certain places, it seems like everybody hates AI, so very hard to get a grasp on what exactly is the reality. And for some specific on how they're using it, so over here, developers would benefit from AI tools that simplify playtesting and automate bug detection. Additionally, AI-powered solutions for localization and quick translations of ad copy, or even generating initial sketches for concept art, could save significant time and resources. So there are definitely multiple different use cases for which AI could be useful for. Another interesting survey, so this one on how respondents say they are using AI. and how the difference between the 24 and the 23 survey, they are pretty much very close on almost all of them. Now, just a while ago, I made a video on the concept of vibe coding, which is basically how you just ask the AI for code and basically just accept it. Personally, for me, that doesn't make much sense, but it seems over here. So for writing or improving code, it seems that quite a lot of people are finding use of it. Then of course, for adaptive difficulty, automated playtesting, generating artwork and game levels, improving animations, in-game text, and voice chat moderation. It's actually interesting how this one is not higher, it's only 44%. I feel like this is definitely one of the best use cases for AI for doing moderation. Then for writing or improving code, writing and narrative design, and simply I don't use AI. With the stats again being just 4% devs don't plan to use AI in 2025. So in conclusion, last year's report showed how the economic headwinds were definitely very tricky, lots of layoffs, lots of issues. So basically that led to a lot more developers adopting strategies like AI in order to save time, diversifying revenue strategies, shipping games to more platforms, prioritizing multiplayer games, and building stronger brands to extend players' engagement and loyalty. So with this blueprint, devs aim to stretch resources and maximize their ROI by finding new ways to save time and increase their game's reach. Then this year, many of these same market forces are still in play, but studios' response to them have shifted slightly. As deep cuts, layoffs, and studio closures continue, the developers we spoke to seem to be putting safety first with strategies that limit their exposure to risk. They're staying small and nimble, diversifying the types of multiplayer games they build, prioritizing trusted platforms, bringing players bigger worlds and more content, and they're turning to time-saving tools, but cautiously. So it does seem like the general takeaway is things are still very tricky in the games industry as a whole. So yep, managing risk and being efficient are definitely going to be very crucial things for the entirety of 2025. And then as to where things are headed, so what happens after 2025? Over here, devs predict the biggest trend of the next year, and the biggest trend is more adoption of live game models and continuous updates. This is definitely a curious one, because again, recently, the whole thing with Concord and many other games, there have been some big high-profile flops of games that were essentially live service games. So I'm curious if that's going to be it. I'm curious if next year we're going to see more live service games, or we're going to see the industry kind of go back to more single-player, normal games. Then also a rise in solo and small dev studios. So that's awesome. That is something that is happening pretty much all the time. Then we've got AI opportunities and challenges, which yep, I definitely feel this is going to be important this year and continue being a trend next year. Then we've got some more web games, global gaming industry growth. That would definitely be nice. And then finally, gaming industry will continue contracting and consolidating. So thankfully, it seems that only 1% are pretty negative, and most people are quite a bit more positive. So yep, definitely quite a lot of data over here in the report. There's a massive amount of things. I really only covered a bunch of highlights. I definitely recommend you go and check out the entire report. There's a link in the description. I really like how Unity does this report every single year so we can see what exactly is going on in the industry as a nice high-level overview. And again, I will be live on Unity's live stream tomorrow. I'll be there with a panel of other game devs, so it should be for an interesting discussion. Alright, so thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.